Welcome to this screencast for carbohydrates. Now, what is carbohydrate? Carbohydrate, first and foremost, we know that it gives us energy. Now, what gives us energy? It is this basic unit of carbohydrates is called glucose. We'll get to know more about it later. So, mainly you should know there are two types of carbohydrates where we can get glucose from. One is complex carbohydrates. Complex means difficult or complicated, and simple, which obviously means the opposite of complex, means not so difficult and not likely to be complicated at all. Now, what is glucose? Every time we eat a carbohydrate food, glucose will enter our blood cells and it's burned or metabolized. Metabolized means we use it, the glucose, break it down, alright, for our energy and our metabolic body activities. So at any one time, we have 1 hour's worth of energy from glucose. Now, glucose that we do not use, or the word excess, okay, that means more than needed, will be turned into a substance called glycogen, which is stored in our liver until we need it. Then we will use this glycogen, convert it back to glucose, and then we'll start using back again. Now this is a magnified picture of what they think are glucose stores stored in glycogen. However, just one word of warning, if let's say you use or you have so much more glucose than those that stored in a glycogen, those excess will be turned to fats, and that will cause us another problem instead. Now, first things first, let's talk about simple carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates simply refers to carbohydrates that can be broken down very easily, and that is sugar. Why they are broken down very easily is because they are made up of very few glucose units. Now, such sources will usually be like cakes, candies, fruits, white rice, and bread. They can be absorbed by the body very quickly, and after a while, one will feel hungry very fast. Now, for complex carbohydrates, we can safely say that it refers to starch, although there are other types of complex carbohydrates. The main one that it refers to is starch. Now, why is it called complex? As we seen earlier, alright, simple carbohydrates have only 1 or 2 glucose units. But for complex, they can stretch on as many as thousands. Okay, usually less than 3,000. Now, brown rice, flour, pasta, and legumes, potatoes, they are usually sources of complex carbohydrates. Some of you may ask, what's the difference between brown rice and white rice? We'll get to that later. Now, if you want to lose weight, people will usually take complex carbohydrates and they need to only to eat a small portion because number one, they are absorbed by the body slowly and you take a longer time to chew them, and one can feel fuller for a longer time. So if you want to lose weight, people usually go for complex carbohydrates. So some of you may be asking, what's the difference between brown rice and white rice? Think of brown rice, rice as rice with clothes on, because they have, if you look at this thing, brown thing here, you notice that these are called husk. Husk is like their coating when they are first taken from the field. They are in husk. This is their almost, you can say, raw form. Okay, it has not undergone any processing, and because their husks have a lot of vitamins and minerals, especially B vitamins, so they are seen as to be the healthier choice. Wherever white rice are like rice with no clothes on because they have already taken off their husk. It has already undergone processing in the factories and therefore have less vitamins and minerals due to his brown husk being removed. So some of you may say, what is starch? I cannot imagine what is starch. So let's take a video of how this person actually extracts starch and tests for starch using an iodine test. So if next time if I talk about starch, you say, I cannot imagine what starch looks like. This is how starch looks like.
Let's get started. The procedure is simple that also a child could do that without problems. Simply take a 100 grams potato and peel it. Now simply grate it. Once it's done, put the product to a beaker with 100 milliliters of hot water. Now mix for about 1-2 minutes. Then filtrate with a cook filter to another container. With a lasting par, that is to say, the grated potato, you can continue the operation several times, adding water, mixing and filtrating again, but this is optional. After 5-10 minutes, starch and solvent in the water will precipitate out. Here you can see the white precipitate. It is pure starch. Simply moving the liquid phase to another beaker, you will isolate the product. Let it dry under room temperature. Here you can see the starch and it appears white, a little bit creamy, but after the desiccation it will be crystalline. Now, to test this really starch, not magic powder, we will use some tincture of iodine, a mix of ethanol, water, potassium iodide and elemental iodine. To test it, put some starch into a test tube with some water and shake. After, add a tincture of iodine that you can dilute with water or not. However, the solution will become black, dark blue colored. What happens is that iodine ions combine to amylase and they make the compound take up this color. My greetings. See you on the next experiment.
Now, there's one more complex carbohydrate I want to introduce to you. You don't really have to remember the facts and details, but just remember that there's one more complex carbohydrate called cellulose, and it consists of 3,000 or more glucose units. Now, these are indigestible. In other words, they cannot be digested by human beings if you eat them alone. Okay, they're usually found in vegetables, and they must be cooked before eating. Now, if we're going to talk about the main groups, where will where will carbohydrates be? They'll mainly be in this group called grains, because this section, alright, grains, okay, will be the one that will provide us energy to do basic work like walking, playing, and breathing. Now you may notice that it just forms a small portion here of the plate, because what they really want to see you eat is the whole grain, not processed food like cakes, candies, but whole grain food like brown rice, wholemeal bread, okay, as they are the ones that provide you more minerals and vitamins than anything else. If you take a look at the Singapore Dietary Guideline, you'll notice there's one that says eat less sugar. Now, why do they say eat less sugar? Mainly because it provides no other nutrient other than carbohydrates. And if we eat too much of it, okay, just now as we referred to the glucose store, if we eat more than those can be stored in a glycogen, it will be stored as fats, and these can lead to obesity. You'll learn more of obesity later. Now, sugary food can also cause decay and cavities if not brushed well. Okay, so just remember, use less sugar for your food. So that means if you are going out to eat, you can ask for orange juice instead of soft drinks. You can ask for less sugar in your desserts. Okay, so, and you can snack on fresh fruits and vegetables instead of all these things here. Now, we come to the effect of heat of carbohydrates. So why we look at the effects of heat? Mainly because when you're cooking, okay, there's going to be fire. So when there's fire, there's heat. So this is what they are saying, is that the effect of heat, that means the carbohydrates in the food itself. So let's take a good look at sugar. So sugar, when sugar is heated, is melted into a colorless liquid, and when it continues, it becomes thicker and golden brown. Now this process is called caramelization. Now in this experiment here, you will notice that it becomes black. Of course, we do not boil that it becomes carbon black, because you won't be able to eat it anyway. So what you need to do is that people usually stop at the brown color, and then that's where they use as liquid. Now let's take a look.
Caramelization. If sugar is heated in the absence of water or in a concentrated solution, as the one being made here, it undergoes a process called caramelization. Caramelization is a result of the decomposition of sugar and is mostly responsible for flavoring and coloring food when cooking. On heating, sugar molecules first melt and then begin to dehydrate. The dehydrated molecules then begin to polymerize into brown pigments. At about 180 degrees Celsius, a light caramel is produced, which is pale amber to golden brown in color and has a rich flavor. Next, a medium caramel is produced, which is golden brown to chestnut brown in color and also has a rich flavor. Further heating produces dark caramel. This is very dark and bitter, it smells burnt, is used for coloring, but lacks appropriate sweetness for flavoring. At about 210 degrees, the sugar breaks down to pure carbon. This leaves a very thick, dark, and bitter caramel. This smells like something you've overcooked.
Now, the next one that we'll be looking at is starch. Okay, cooking starch with water. Okay, that's a difference. Cooking starch with water. Now, starchy foods such as potatoes, rice, if you take a good look at them before they are cooked, they're actually quite hard. And when absorbed in liquids, they'll start to absorb water. Absorb means they start to take in water. Now what will happen is that starch grains within, that means you saw the starch just now, they'll start to swell. Swell means become bigger in size, and they'll start to soften. Then it will come to a point where they will actually burst, because they have absorbed too much of this water until it's like a balloon, and they burst, releasing the starch to form a paste. So this process is called gelatinization. Gelatinization. So like we see this example here, it's really the rice, okay, or cereal that has been absorbing a lot of water and now become very gooey, slightly gooey in a sense because they have absorbed too much water and has, what you said, exploded to form a paste. Now one good example or a dish I can think of is your porridge. Take a good look at your porridge, not just rice with water, but it has been boiled to a point where they have actually become pasty and not so much looking as normal grain rice. Another type of heat, another type of effect that we have on starch, but without water this time, is that it's called dextrinization, because that means if you look at your toast bread, okay, it goes into the oven or the toaster when it's white, right? Or at least brown. So what happens is that when you start to heat it up, there's starch on the surface of the bread, and it breaks down into things called dextrins. So that's why we call it dextrinization. So when it turned into dextrins, the whole thing will turn brown, toasted, and definitely more crispy. Now, just now we talked about cellulose much earlier. So now, what are the effects of heat on carbohydrates? Cellulose is also one of them. So heat will break down the cellulose, especially when you boil it in water and everything, and it becomes smaller and softer. Smaller and softer. Maybe you could take a measuring tape to measure the example carrots before it's cooked and after it's cooked, and even the texture. Alright, so we know that before cooking, carrots are very hard. but after cooking it becomes mashed. You can mash it up. Alright, that's the difference. Now you come to the end. This is the review questions. Take a good look at these review questions and please answer them. You can pause the video here and it'll be good for you to answer them because you never know when you might be tested on this. Until the next screencast, this is Miss Chen.